Hi, this is Ann Holmes with No Sewing Into You Quilted. Some of you will remember my Valentine surprise blocks that we did in 2018. Well, this is a belated Valentine to show you how we're going to join the pieces. Instead of a queen size quilt, I ended up making a twin size made in 3 units, 3 long units, so it was easier to home stitch on the home sewing machine. My problem is I started this a couple years ago stitching, but my eyesight is not that great anymore, so I sent it out to my friend Hazel to finish quilting it for me. But I am thankful that I can still see at a distance, you know, to piece my quilts with the No Sewing Into You Quilted technique. So today I'm going to show you again how to join units of a quilt. Now I'm going to show you how we prepare the center unit. On the center unit, we just stitched everything inside this block and left the sashing free. That's what we've got to turn and sew to the outside units. So what you do is first just pull away the sashing from the back and the batting. Just pull it all away. And I've got my iron ready to go because we're going to just turn back like 1/4 of an inch on each sashing. I have projects on top of projects. To start working on joining the units of Katie's quilt, I just put a couple big cutting boards on top of my project so I wouldn't interfere with that. These are what the 2 outside edges of the quilt look like, the right and left side of the quilt. And on these, we stitched all the way to the edges on both pieces. We put an outside border around the quilt. We didn't leave any space here. We stitched this all the way to both sides of the 2 outside units. This is what the 3 long units look like. The center unit, which we're going to use for joining the units, was made with sashing on both sides of the quilt. And so when we machine quilted this, we just stitched up to, or the inside of the block, and left the sashing free so we could pull the sashing back to join the units. The 2 long sides were quilted all the way up to this edge. This is where we're going to join the center unit to here. But this, on the 2 outside units, you stitch all the way up to the edge. So you can see how I pulled back the batting and the back from the sashing. You want to be able to see this seam line in here because we want that measurement when we turn this back to be a 3-inch sashing, finished sashing. All right, so after the back and batting is pulled out of the way, what we want to do, I'm using this 3x5 index card to get a 3-inch sashing, a finished sashing. So I'm pushing that into the seam allowance just like that, and then I'm using the iron to iron that up or press it to get it a crease. Here, let me pull it out a little bit. So you use your iron on that 3x5 card and give it a nice crease. It's a little skimpy here, but it's going to be fine as long as it's a turned edge. And now we're going to use the glue stick. This creases it, but to give us a nice crisp edge, we're going to use a glue stick to turn this edge back. So I'll just swipe some glue stick in there. And then I just fold that up again. I'm going to press it one more time, and that'll give us a nice edge to sew to the other piece. So that's what we're going to do to finish both sides of the center unit. I'm ready to join the center part to the first half of our quilt. So, we've turned this back, we've creased the edge, and with all of that batting and backing turned back, I'm just going to come over here and pin it in here like just 1/4 of an inch from this edge as well. All right, now I want to add this turned edge to 1/4 of an inch from the edge here. So I'm going to mark it with an erasable marking pen, water erasable, and I'm going to mark 1/4 of an inch line. All right, so now I'm going to make sure that these seam lines will line up, and I'm going to scooch this back. Just take our 1/4 of an inch seam, and I'm going to use some large pins and pin this. I have to scoot this to make sure those lines are lined up. To do that, you can just take a straight edge ruler and line that up so that you get it in position carefully. I'm going to use a walking foot to put this on, so then you can ease in the fabric, because this was quilted and that is not, so it can ease in. Just make sure that you get your lines lined up. All right, now I've got just the top of this middle unit stitched, or not stitched, pardon me, pinned to the bottom, and I switched to these smaller, sharper pins. This is what the back looks like. The back and the batting is still out of the way. Now I'm going to take it to my machine tomorrow because I'm tired. It's good to quit when you're tired. There's an old Pennsylvania Dutch expression. It says, the hurrier I go, the behinder I get. So I'm taking a break for today, but it's prepared now. What I will do is go to my machine and use my walking foot and use a small zigzag stitch with invisible thread on the top to stitch just the top of the second or the side unit to the center. You can see I just stitched the top of the quilt to the side unit. And now I'm ready to trim the batting. I'll have to lay this down flat and trim the batting. With the batting laying flat, then take your sharp scissors and just trim it right along the seam allowance for that. So I'm using my card trick again, where I drew 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, a line on my note 3x5 note card, and now I'm turning that seam back and pressing it with the big iron, and then I'll come along with the glue stick and put that in there so it keeps it a nice crisp edge. You can see that the next step after turning the edge back is to use some pins and pin it right on the seam allowance there. That was the first stitching that we stitched, just the top to the middle unit. And now we're going to pin this right on top of that line. Joining a quilt in units is much easier than trying to struggle with a big quilt under your sewing machine, especially with my old Bernina. I just have, not very many inches of space there. But I put this on a zigzag stitch, and I'm now I reversed my threads. I'm putting the white thread on the top for the back, and the invisible thread is on the bottom, which is really the front of the quilt. And so I'm doing this small zigzag stitch that's 1.6 wide to join this section. I just stitched in those in the sashing to finish quilting that area, and then I've prepared the center unit again for the first step to turn the top back for joining to the third unit, and I'll repeat all these steps that you've seen. Yay, a finished quilt. This is my granddaughter's quilt for a twin size bed. It's finished, yay. And I just wanted to show you that the blocks that I made were called Valentine Surprise, and you can see us building those blocks on our YouTube channel, No Sewing Until You Quilt It. And so when you have a finished quilt, the last thing you should do is put your label on the back of the quilt. And you can also see on the back of the quilt, you can also see some of the stitching that shows up a little better. When you stitch a No Sewing Until You Quilt It project, you have to do outline stitching first, which makes the design pop, and then whatever quilting that you want to do to fill it in. It's wonderful to have a finished quilt, but you should remember to put a label on your quilt. I use this light fabric transfer with my inkjet printer to make my label. It's a very nice product to use because when you wash your quilt, you won't be picking up some of the dye from other products that can be used for labels.